At this very moment, a major turn of events is unfolding. American officials emphasize that every point of the peace plan will be coordinated with Kyiv down to the smallest detail, and the White House press secretary stated that Rustem Umerov, the secretary of the National Security and Defense Council, has already supported most of the plan's provisions during negotiations. In addition, Ukraine is rewriting one of the central points of the US peace formula, peace for peace. Ukrainian media, citing the Wall Street Journal, have revealed the first details. The initial draft proposed conducting an audit of all international aid to Ukraine. In the version agreed upon by Kyiv, this point was replaced with a provision granting full amnesty to all parties for actions committed during the war. Therefore, there is a high probability that other points of the deal can also be rewritten. And last night, Zelensky urgently made a statement. We will fight for an adequate end to the war. The Ukrainian side has intensified work on the points of the new peace plan. The president of Ukraine emphasized that calls and meetings with partners are being held constantly, and they can change a lot. It has begun. The blackout has reached the Rostov region. Unknown drones cut off power for Russians. And one more piece of good news from Arayev. On the East Siberian Railway, a pink train carrying coal derailed. Yes, once again, traffic is paralyzed, and the prosecutor's office has taken up the case.
There are no casualties. About 150 meters of railway track have been destroyed. Restoration crews are working at the scene. The expected delay for 6 trains is over 6 hours.
And here is the first detail of the investigation. The track repair workers helped ensure that the coal, which is already in short supply, definitely wouldn't reach Russians. The preliminary cause of the incident is believed to be a foreign object left on the tracks, which workers forgot there during repairs. By the way, a day before this, a freight train caught fire on the border of Perm-Krai. According to reports, the tank cars contained gas condensate. Breaking news! The United Kingdom is preparing troops for Ukraine amid a new round of US negotiations. At the same time, it has become known that coordination between the troops of different countries will be carried out by a group led by a British 2-star officer. There are also plans to expand the Black Sea group of Turkey, Romania, and Bulgaria to better protect maritime routes and clear mines from ports. A true triumph for Ukrainian forces. A Ukrainian Barracuda blew up a Russian depot on the banks of the Dnipro. Judging by the powerful detonation, the roasting of the Russians was a resounding success, and immediately afterward, the Russian army lost its stockpile of V ammunition. At this very moment, a bloody purge of Russians is underway. Pokrovsk lured them in, Kupiansk cut them off, and the Ukrainian armed forces delivered a deadly counterstrike. The occupiers are suffering colossal losses. Kupiansk has turned into a meat grinder, and an entire group of Russians was simply trapped in a snare. Watch for sensational details of this brilliant operation.
It played a cruel trick on the occupiers. While the enemy threw all its forces into a desperate attempt to seize control of the ruins of the city destroyed by the Russian army, the Ukrainian armed forces launched a counterattack 200 kilometers to the north, in Kupiansk. The enemy forces there suffered huge losses, according to the Ukrainian command, and were forced to retreat.
The enemy was cleared out from the northwestern outskirts. They're no longer there, and that's a huge achievement.
In fact, the Ukrainian armed forces have cut off the Russian invaders in the northern part of Kupiansk from their main supplies of provisions, cannon fodder, and ammunition. Next, according to Commander Fedorenko, his unit and an adjacent unit set about locating the remaining Russian sabotage groups and clearing them out. As of now, the operation is almost complete.
If you open a map that more or less accurately reflects the line of contact, you'll see that the enemy has been pushed back quite significantly in the northern outskirts. And what does that mean? The farther we manage to push the enemy forces away from the northern outskirts of Kupiansk, the less room and opportunity they have to send their sabotage groups into the city itself.
But unfortunately, the same kind of brilliant successes can't be claimed by the Ukrainian armed forces on another hottest section of the front near Pokrovsk, or in the city itself. Russian assaults there don't stop day or night. It seems the Kremlin has thrown all its forces into taking the city. Nevertheless, despite all their efforts, the Ukrainian command notes that our defenders are heroically holding the line.
The situation in and around Pokrovsk is extremely difficult, but somehow we're still holding on.
According to the military, most of the city is now in the so-called gray zone. This is when control over the territory constantly shifts from one side to the other, and fighting takes place for every building entrance. Syrskyi also fully understands the complexity of the situation in Pokrovsk. In particular, the commander-in-chief stated that the AFU units and other components of the defense forces continue to carry out their tasks in the Pokrovsk-Mir-Novgorod agglomeration area, despite the fact that enemy activity remains high in this sector.
Enemy activity remains high, but clear coordination and the well-coordinated actions of our units help us to resist it. We are working to ensure the continuity of our logistics and are taking measures to disrupt the enemy's supply routes.
Nevertheless, the situation in the Pokrovsk direction remains extremely difficult. The enemy, disregarding their losses, continues to assault AFU positions, the commander-in-chief shares in his operational update.
In just the past 4 days, total enemy losses in the Pokrovsk direction amounted to 487 personnel. Of these, 350 are irrecoverable losses. The exchange fund is being replenished with captured Russian soldiers.
For security reasons, the Ukrainian command does not disclose further details about the situation in the Pokrovsk direction. However, they can share information about completed special operations on the front line. For example, the head of the main intelligence directorate, Kirilo Budanov, gave an interview in which he shared details of one of the most daring airborne operations by the GUR, during which special forces, having secured certain positions behind enemy lines, managed to break through and establish a full-fledged ground corridor. At that time, Budanov himself was nearby and was in command of the operation.
Why was such an operation necessary, and why was it carried out in this particular way? Because the situation was extremely tense and critical. I want to remind you that all of this happened against the backdrop of official statements from the Russian Federation about the capture of the city. When Gerasimov reported to Putin that the city had been taken, and here you need to understand what the situation was like at that moment. Nothing else would have worked. What we did allowed us to win precious time, so that the main units of the armed forces could calmly, or as calmly as possible, approach the city to reinforce it, so to speak.
It is possible that even at this very moment, special units of the GUR are carrying out another special operation in the Pokrovsk direction. Military social media channels are already reporting on the clearing of Pokrovsk, strikes on enemy supply lines, and the establishment of alternative logistics routes. Now for the AFU, so all we can do is wait for official confirmation of the good news from the Ukrainian command.
It happened. Poland is officially in a pre-war mode. Sabotage acts are happening one after another. Enemy drones are in the sky, and there was an explosion near Lublin which became the last straw. But the main question now is this: is Warsaw ready to give Moscow such a response that the Kremlin will lose any desire to go further? The answer is coming up.
Russia has attacked Poland.
Nowadays, the more commonly used and widely recognized term for this phenomenon is hybrid war, and you could definitely say that it is already well underway because things keep happening in Poland all the time on a regular and ongoing basis. Since
the moment of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, neighboring Poland has also been systematically under threat. And while earlier only politicians and statesmen talked about a possible Russian war against Poland, over time those predictions began to come true. The climax came in September 2025 when about 24 Russian drones crossed into Polish airspace. A significant number of them entered from Belarus. 4 UAVs were shot down. Polish military officials stated that in September, the threat from Russian drones was very real.
so far, the measures that Poland is currently taking in response to the situation are primarily diplomatic in nature rather than being military actions. They have not crossed that particular line yet, but if we're talking about the country's military leadership, they openly state that Russia is preparing for a possible attack on Poland, and Poland is also taking appropriate measures.
It's not just about drones. Recently, there have been several acts of sabotage on the railways in Poland. In particular, a section of track leading to the Polish-Ukrainian border was damaged. The country's Prime Minister Donald Tusk emphasized that these were acts of sabotage. According to him, 2 Ukrainian citizens are suspected of the attacks. They arrived in Poland from Belarus and managed to escape back after the sabotage.
If the Poles had managed to detain them, they would have faced rather lengthy prison sentences. Basically, these are people who are willing to sell themselves to Russia for money.
Polish law enforcement is convinced that the Ukrainians were hired by Russian special services and has already demanded that Belarus extradite the suspects. This chain of events culminated in an attack in Russia's St. Petersburg on the Polish ambassador Krzysztof Krajewski when he arrived in the city to meet with Poles living there.
Poles are perceived as enemies. And to set this gang on the ambassador and note that the police did nothing, they just simply watched and basically smirked, merely observing. This is not just a natural outcome. I am convinced that this attack was fully planned and sanctioned by the relevant authorities, either in St. Petersburg or perhaps even in Moscow.
An aggressive group of Russian activists carried signs with anti-Polish and anti-Ukrainian slogans and attacked the ambassador because his country supports Ukraine. The Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs stated that at first there were verbal insults, but then there was a clear attempt to use physical force, which forced the ambassador's security guards to intervene.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now. Hell in Russia. Ukraine has unleashed a fiery collapse. The latest missiles and drones are burning Russia to dust. Strikes of unprecedented power. Our missiles and drones are breaking through Russian defenses. Which developments are scorching Russia's rear and changing the course of the war? Watch.
Self-propelled artillery, mortars, drones, electronic warfare, shells, ammunition, communication systems, air defense, missiles. Ukraine is actively ramping up the production of its own military equipment and ammunition. Production is becoming increasingly precise, large-scale, and technologically advanced.
During this war, Ukraine has already reached a milestone. Almost 60% of the weapons we have, the weapons our soldiers use, are Ukrainian-made, and these are powerful weapons with many advanced features.
This is no longer just a local industry. Ukraine is building its own military technological shield, a network of production lines, testing grounds, and combat units that turn ideas into weaponry. And our specialists immediately test them in real conditions.
The Ukrainian side is scaling up strike capabilities with a range of over 1,000 kilometers.
Let's start with drones, that small but decisive technology that overnight changed the rules of war. The FP family of strike platforms and other Ukrainian models are produced according to the principle fast, cheap, effective. Their advantages are simple design, rapid production, and tactical relevance. They make it possible to carry out precision strikes, disrupt enemy logistics, and keep enemy positions far from the front line under constant pressure.
In 2024, about 1 million units were contracted, and already in by 2025, production had increased to 30,000 FPV drones per month. It should be noted that this quantity, an annual production of about 4 million FPV drones, is a record figure, even taking into account the capabilities of the military-industrial complexes of all NATO countries combined. In other words, at this particular moment in time, the Ukrainian Ukroboronprom is producing an unprecedented number of unmanned aerial vehicles. For comparison, the United States Army adds approximately 100,000 unmanned aerial vehicles to its arsenal each year. Once again, I want to emphasize that the Ukrainian defense industry produces up to 4 million drones.
The technological production recipe is simple. A composite fuselage, 3D printed wings, inexpensive components, and open-source navigation solutions. All this makes it possible to produce functional platforms in batches. But you can't cut costs on electronics. Navigation and guidance systems make the drones resistant to Russian electronic warfare. Otherwise, mass waves of launches won't break through the enemy's dense defenses. At the same time as drones, a strategic direction is also developing. Here, the key players are missiles and missile systems, which strike at the enemy's rear, depriving them of fuel, depots, and command nodes. Neptune is a domestic anti-ship and coastal missile system that has strengthened the security of maritime borders and given Kyiv tools to impact the enemy's logistics in the Black Sea. Here
is something unprecedented in world history. The next case is that Ukraine, as a country that effectively does not possess a navy, inflicted severe damage on the Russian Federation by destroying up to 35% of the Black Sea Fleet's vessels at one point. According to the British side, the naval activity of the Russian Federation in the Black Sea Basin is a consequence of this. The use of both strike drones and accordingly naval drones has dropped to a historic minimum.
Another important milestone is the FPV-5 Flamingo cruise missile. This is a fully Ukrainian development with a stated range of up to 3,000 kilometers.
For comparison, the legendary American Tomahawk has a strike range of 1,600 kilometers. The warhead of the Tomahawk is about 500 kilograms. The warhead of the Flamingo is about 1 ton, 150 kilograms. The most recent documented use of the Flamingo was a strike on the oil terminal in Tuapse. Moreover, Russian public channels themselves confirmed that the Ukrainian side used these types of weapons. In
the combination of small drones and large cruise missiles, Ukraine gains both scale and strategy. Drones keep the enemy on edge, missiles strike critical targets, and together this seriously undermines the enemy's ability to wage a prolonged war. But Ukraine's defense industry is not just about small and large systems, but also time-tested developments like the Bodana, Stogdan, and other artillery and anti-tank systems. These provide mobility, firepower, resilience, and operate within a unified strike network. Drone reconnaissance, artillery adjustment, precision and missile strikes, and so the cycle repeats.
40% of the Russian budget depends on revenue from the sale of oil and petroleum products. And accordingly, taking into account this budget-forming sector of the occupying country, adjustments are made to the actions of the Ukrainian side, namely the use of strike drones and means of destruction, specifically Flamingo and Neptune, when neutralizing oil refining complexes of the Russian Federation. According to the Russian side's assessment, losses resulting from the Ukrainian strike on the oil refining complex of the Russian Federation are estimated at around $100 billion.
Ukraine's production capabilities are already extending beyond its borders. Through agreements and joint projects, Ukrainian companies are legalizing assembly and serial production in European countries. If before the start of the full-scale war, the Ukrainian defense industry was lagging behind, then by 2024 production volumes reached about $9 billion, and in 2025 they grew to $35 billion. Plans for 2026 include scaling up to $60 billion. And this is only the beginning.